Welcome back. This is Mrs. Boots, and we are going to work through the practice problems for the properties of graphs. Now, the first thing we're going to do is all of the x-intercepts for problems 1, 2, and 3. Remember, the x-intercepts is where it crosses the x-axis. Right? So crossing the x-axis. Remember, we're going to round to the closest whole number because these might be slightly off. So I see that for my x-intercepts on problem 1, it's approximately at -3 and +3. Alright, let's look at number 2. I have two x-intercepts here. One of them is at -1, and the other one is at 2, 3, 4, 5, -5. Okay. Now let's do the last one. X-intercepts, that looks like it's about -2. And that would be about 4. Okay, now let's do our y-intercepts for all three problems. So where does it cross the y-axis? On number 1, it's down at -3. So that is 0, -3 for the y-intercept. Number 2 is actually up at +2, so we have 0, 2. And then on number 3, it's also at 2, so 0, 2. Each place, each time, where does it cross the y-axis? Alright, now let's do the domain for all three graphs. So domain, left to right. All I care about are the x values for the domain. So number 1, I notice I've got arrows. That means it's going all the way to the left and all the way to the right. So we're going from -infinity all the way to +infinity. Remember, infinities always get parentheses. Number 2, I have an arrow on the left, so I know I'm going to -infinity. I have a dot on the right. So that x value on the right is a 6. Now, does that 6 get a closed bracket or an open dot? I'm sorry, parenthesis. So, yes, closed bracket because it's a closed circle. Now, let's look at number 3. I got an arrow on the right, so I know I'm going to +infinity. But on the left, I have a dot. And that dot's at -6. So we're going to have a bracket because it's a closed dot at -6. Alright, now let's do our range for all three problems. So for number 1, I notice that my arrows are going up, but they don't go down. At the bottom, I seem to hit and bounce back up. So remember, range, we go from bottom to top or low to high. So the lowest point is -3 because I'm looking at my y values for range. My highest point is going to be infinity. So we go from -3 to infinity. Now, I should have asked before I drew it in there, that -3, does it have a bracket or a parenthesis? Yeah, it actually has a bracket because if you look, this curve is intersecting at 3. Okay, it actually touches it. Alright, let's look at number 2. How low does it go? Well, it comes down here to a -4, and then how high does it go? Arrows trump dots, so it's going to go to +infinity. So I have a -4 to +infinity. Okay, now let's look at the range on number 3. How low does it go? Well, it goes to -6. How high does it go? To 2. Well, what about the arrow? Well, the arrow doesn't go up or down. It's just going sideways. So the arrow doesn't count for this one. So we're going to go from -6 to +2. Now, is the -6 on the curve? Yes, it's got a closed dot on the curve. Is 2 on the curve? Yes. So it also gets a bracket. Alright, now it's time to do our positives. Remember, positive, that's everything above 0. Okay, so it's everything above the 0 is our positives. So when I look at my curve, I'm going to highlight the stuff that's above 0 or above the x-axis. That's the only parts we're going to look at. Now we pay attention to the x's for this, so I kind of need to draw some stop blocks in there because we're not going to go below, okay? So above the x-axis on number 1, I notice it starts at negative infinity, goes over to that negative 3 where that x-intercept was at, right? And then picks up on the other side and goes from positive 3 over to infinity. Easy enough. Now let's look at number 2, again above the x-axis. So I would recommend colored pencils or a highlighter. Go in and actually color. That's above, that's above, that's above. All of that's above the x-axis. Put yourself a little splotch so you know where it stops. Okay. So number 2, on the left side, I go from negative infinity to, what was that? That was a negative 5. And then we said on the right side, now where does it pick up? It picks up about negative 1 and goes, oh, but it stops. It doesn't go to infinity, right? It's got to stop. We stop at 6. Okay? So that's where it is positive or above the x-axis. All right, now let's look at number 3. Remember, positive above the x-axis. Go in and color it. Where is it above? Okay, so I have those 3 little line segments, but they're all connected, so I can express it as one big thing. So on the left, that starts at negative 2, and on the right, it ends at 4. All right, now we don't include the negative 2 and the 4 because they're actually x-intercepts. They're on the axis. Okay? All right, now let's look at our negatives. Negatives are below the x-axis. Okay? So number 1, where is it? Negative. Let's color that a different color. Okay, so it's only that green piece is negative. Well, where does that green piece start? It starts at negative 3 and goes over to positive 3. So we'll put parentheses around that because it actually hits the axis. Okay, let's look at number 2. I have that little V shape and that's it. Okay, nothing else goes below the x-axis. So that goes from negative 5 over to negative 2. Okay, and both of those will get parentheses. Okay, let's look at number 3. Remember, color everything that's below. Doesn't have to be beautiful. Just color it. Okay. So where is it below the axis? Notice that it starts at negative 6 on the left, goes all the way up to that negative 2. We're going to put parentheses around the negative 2, bracket around the negative 6, okay? And then on the other side, it starts at 4, that's on the axis, and goes to infinity. Remember, it keeps going there. And that's the negative part that is below the axis. Okay, increasing. Increasing is a positive slope. So we're going up and to the right. Positive slope, okay? So number 1, let's color everything that has a positive slope. Positive slope. Okay, so where does that start? It starts at the x value of 0 and goes to infinity. Okay, number 2, positive slope. Remember, I don't care where the arrows are going. Positive slope and positive slope. Okay, so I see I've got 2 pieces there that have a positive slope. One of them starts at negative 4. Yeah, that's a negative 4. And it goes over to 0. Alright, and then the other one starts at positive 4, and it's going to go to 6. Okay, so those are my positive slopes. Alright, number 3, positive slope. Cover it in. Increasing, increasing, increasing. Everything that increases. Only the stuff that increases. There we go. Increasing. And there's only one piece, so I notice it starts at -6 and goes up to an x value of 0. Alright. Last piece. Decreasing. Decreasing is a negative slope. Again, the direction of the arrow doesn't matter, just that it's a negative slope line. So number 1, I see I have a negative slope right over here. Okay, so that negative slope starts at -infinity and goes to 0. That's the only piece I have. Now let's look at number 2. Color everything that has a negative slope. Doesn't matter how steep it is, only that it's a negative. And we notice we have 2 sections for this one. One of them's from -infinity over to that -4. And then the other section starts at 0 and goes to +4. Alright, negative slope for number 3. Okay, so decreasing, negative slopes. Okay, so my negative slope starts at 3 and goes over to 6. Now, number 3, you're asking, well, what about the ones that are flat? Well, those are not increasing or decreasing. Those have 0 slope, so they would not be included in either one, increasing or decreasing. They would be completely left out. Let's scroll down and do the next 3. Okay, first thing, x-intercepts. Where does it touch the x-axis? Okay, so number 4, where does it touch the x-axis? Well, if that arrow keeps going, it would actually touch the x-axis right over there, somewhere in there, okay? And in the middle, and then on the right-hand side. So I have 3 x-intercepts. So one of them is at -6, one of them is at -1, and the last one's at +6. Okay, let's look at number 5. 2 x-intercepts. Okay, one of them's at -2, so -2, 0. The other one is at 3. And then number 6, looks like we have one spot where it's going to cross over, and that's it, and that is at +5. Okay? Okay, y-intercepts. Where does it cross the y-axis? So for number 4, looks like I've got a -2. And remember the 0 goes in front. Okay, for number 5, it's crossing at -4. And for number 6, it's crossing at -1. So those are my 3 y-intercepts. Okay, let's look at our domain. Now I notice on number 4 I've got arrows. The arrows are not only going up and down, they're going left and right. So my domain is going to keep going all the way to the left, all the way to the right. Great fun. And there's no stops or breaks in the middle, so we don't have to stop it or break it. Okay? Number 5, I've got dots on the left and on the right. Okay? So on the left, we're at -6 as a closed dot, so it gets a bracket. And on the right, we're at 7, but it has an open dot, so it's going to get a parenthesis. Number 6 has an arrow going to the right, but on the left, it has a dot. That dot's at -4. And it gets a bracket because it is closed, and then my arrow always means infinity, so we're going to go to +infinity. Okay, so now let's look at our range. Again, we've got arrows. Arrows trump high spots and low spots. So my range is going to go from -infinity to +infinity. On number 5, I need my low spots and my high spots, My low spot's at -4. And my high spot goes all the way up to 3. Now because these have closed dots, and I should have made that -4 a square bracket because it's actually on the curve. Okay, number 6. Where's my low? Low's down here at -3. And then how high does it go? Well, this arrow is going to go up as well as to the right. So that's going to go to infinity. And that -3, it's a nice cute little square bracket because it's on a closed dot. Okay, let's look at positive. Everywhere it's positive above the x-axis. Okay, remind yourself, positive means you're going above the x-axis. So on number 4, I'm going above the x-axis. Kind of tricky tracing the curves. It's gonna stop. There's above the x-axis. Okay, so let's look at that. So above the x-axis, going from -6 over to -1, and then again from +6 to infinity. Okay, let's look at number 5. Where is it above the x-axis? So just kind of start coloring. It's above the x-axis right in there. And then on the other side, above the x-axis. So now let's write those down. It goes from -6 to -2. And then from 3 over to 7. Okay, number 6 looks like the tricky one because notice that arrow. It's going to go above the axis from where that arrow is hitting the axis over. But before that, it's not above the axis. So we're just going to start at that point, and that point was at 5. So from 5 to infinity, it is above the x-axis. Okay, now let's do our negatives on all 3. Remember, negative is below the axis. Okay, so I'm going to go below the axis. So over here on the left, that arrow means it keeps going. And then I've got my ditch in the middle of my curve. Okay, so I'm going from -infinity to where it hit the axis, which was at -6. Then I start up at -1 and go over to +6. All of that's below the axis. Let's look at number 5. Color it in. Where is it below the axis? Okay, so it's below the axis from -2 over to +3. Alright, now number 6. Where is it below the axis? Well, it's below the axis from where it starts, which is at -4. All the way to where it hits the axis, which is at +5. So we got a -4 to +5. Okay, now it's for increasing. Increasing for all 3. Remember, increasing was the positive slope. Okay, so positive slope. Where is it? If I drew a straight line, even though it's a curve, if I drew a straight line, where would the slope be positive? So my slope would be positive all along here, all the way up to the top of that hill. And then from the bottom of the ditch, we're going to climb out. That would be a positive slope. Okay, so I'm going to go from -infinity to where? That's going to -4. That's the top of the hill. And then I'm going to dig out the bottom of my ditch, which is at 3, and go to +infinity. Both of those are increasing. Okay, both of those I'm climbing uphill. Alright, let's look at number 5. Where are we climbing uphill? Doesn't matter how fast, but we're climbing uphill over here on the right-hand side. Okay, so where does that at? That's from 0 over to 7. Okay? Now number 6, where are we climbing uphill? Oh, the whole thing climbs uphill on number 6. So we're going to start at -4 and go to positive infinity. Now let's look at the decreasing. Remember, decreasing is a negative slope. That's like rolling down the hill or sliding down the hill. Doesn't matter if it's a curve. It's where am I going downhill, I'm decreasing. So number 4, I'm decreasing all along that stretch. Okay? So that stretch goes from -4 over to +3. Number 5, where am I decreasing? It's all along this stretch, which goes from -6 over to 0. And on number 6, I don't have any decreasing, so I'm just going to write none. And that's okay. We can have no decreasing. Alright, time for 7, 8, and 9. We can do the same thing, go through and do everything on each one. So, x-intercept, all 3 of them. Number 7, do I have any places it crosses the x-axis? No. So that's none. Alright? Number 8, where does it cross or touch the x-axis? Well, I got a little splotch right there. Looks like that's at 5. So 5, 0, it touches. It actually comes in contact with the x-axis. Number 9, we have 2 places that touches the x-axis. One's at -6, and the other one is at -1. Okay, let's look at the y-intercept. So where does it cross the y-axis? So on number 7, crossing the y-axis, it looks like at 4. So I'm going to go 0, 4. On number 8, we don't. We do not cross the y-axis or touch it, so we have none. And on number 9, we also don't cross or touch the y-axis, so it is also a none. Alright, so let's look at our domain. Domain is our x values. So I'm going to go all the way to the left side of the graph, and all the way to the right side of the graph. Okay, so we go from -6. And I notice there's those dots in the middle lining up on 1, but they're both on 1, and the solid's going to trump the open dot. And then we go all the way over to 8. So it goes from -6, which is going to have a bracket, over to 8, which is an open dot, gets parentheses. Alright? So now let's look at number 8. I have an arrow. Arrow goes -infinity. Then I have a solid dot at -2, so he's going to get a bracket. Do my U shape because I got another piece, and it starts out at +2, but it doesn't have a solid dot, so it's going to get a parenthesis. And then I have another arrow, so I'm going to +infinity. Okay, number 9, domain, x values. Where are we going? So we're going from -6 to -1. Both of those have solid dots. And then I have another piece that picks up at +1 that has a solid dot, and then an arrow, so it's going to +infinity. Okay, so now let's do our range. Remember, the range is the y value. It's very good. So that range goes from low to high. So I go to the lowest point on my graph to the highest point on my graph. Then I'm going to double check and see if there's any breaks in the middle. Okay, so the lowest point on my graph is at -5. It's going to go all the way up to -2. And then it picks up at +2 and goes up to +5. Now, should I have used brackets in there? Yes, I should have. Okay, remember the solid dot trumps the open dot, so those 2's get brackets, and the 5's are on the curves. So those also should have been brackets. And notice how I'm just kind of coloring over them, making them a big square bracket. Yes, I've actually told students to do that. If they're on a test, just write it in. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, range on number 8. I got an arrow, so I'm going to negative infinity. Doesn't matter how other low spot it goes, that's negative infinity. How high does it go? Well, kind of looks like a -1. Yep, -1. -1's on the graph, so it does get a bracket. Then it starts up at 0. 0 also gets a bracket. And we have an arrow, so it's going positive infinity. Now let's look at number 9. How low does it go? Now it goes from 0 to 2, and then I start back up at 5, and I have an arrow. So I go from 0 to 2, and then 5 to infinity. Infinity gets a parenthesis, 5 is closed, 2's included, and 0 has a closed dot. Alright, now for positive. Positive, positive, positive. Positive is above the x-axis. So anything that's above the x-axis, we color it. Okay? So I got one little horseshoe above the x-axis, and that horseshoe starts at -6 and goes to +1. The -6 has a solid dot, but the +1 has an open dot. Okay, let's look on number 8. Anything above the x-axis. So I got a horseshoe over here. That's above the x-axis. It starts at +2, but there's an arrow, so it's going to infinity. That +2 has an open dot, so it has a parenthesis. Now, above the x-axis on number 9. So I have my horseshoe shape, and then I have some kind of little swoosh. Okay? So my little horseshoe shape goes from -6 to -1 above the x-axis, and then I'm going to pick up over here at +1 and go to infinity, because all of that's above the x-axis as well. Okay, now let's do our negatives. Remember, negatives are below. So I'm going to color what's below the axis. Okay, so below the axis on number 7 starts at 1 and goes all the way over to 8. On number 8, the stuff below the axis, because we got that arrow, we got to go from negative infinity. Right? We're going to go all the way up to -2. All of that's below the x-axis. On number 9, I don't have anything below the x-axis, so I'm just going to write the word none. Makes it super easy. Okay, increasing. Increasing, remember that's our positive slopes. So we're going to go through and color. If I were to start at one point and go the other, it wouldn't make a straight line that has a positive slope, or is increasing, climbing up the hill, climbing out of the ditch. Positive slopes. Okay? Now I realize the top of the curve is a little tricky to figure out where it's at. You can put it at a 0.5, or you can just round to one or the other. That's fine by me for this exercise. You really use increasing and decreasing when you get to pre-cal. Okay? So we start at -6, and we go to the top of that hill, and the top of that hill is about -3. Okay? And then we go from the bottom of the ditch, which is at 4, and we go to the top of the ditch, which is at 8. Okay? So now let's look at number 8. Where are we going up the hill? And where are we coming out of the ditch? Okay, so up the hill, we're going from negative infinity okay, all the way up to -5. And then it starts at +5 and goes to positive infinity. Alright, number 9. Up the hill or out of the ditch? Okay, so up the hill starts at -6. Goes to, we can say -3, you can say -3.5, -2.5. I'm just going to put -3. It's kind of hard to tell, so don't worry about it. And then we're going to go from 1 to infinity. Okay, decreasing, decreasing, down the hill. Jack and Jill went down the hill. Okay, so we're going down the hill and down into the ditch. Alright, so my down the hill part started at -3, went to 1, but the other piece starts at 1 and goes to 4. So we're just going to go all the way from -3 to 4 because that closed dot trumps the open dot. Okay, number 8. We got down the hill and into the ditch. Okay, so down the hill starts at the top of the hill, which we said was at 5, -5. And it's going to go all the way down the hill to -2. And then my down into the ditch part starts at 2 and goes to 5. Alright, number 9. Down the hill or into the ditch. I got one part that goes down the hill. That hill started, we said it was, the top was at -3. And it's going to go down to the bottom, which is at -1. And this concludes all the practice problems for the properties of graphs.